Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolai Feldman. This is War Diary with Alexei Arestovich. Alexei is with our stream. Hello there. Hi everybody. Now let's start with Avdiivka. The troops were withdrawn. There are different remarks about that by different commentators, but there are several questions that are still not answered. And I want to start with one question to you. 0 to 60, right? Last time you said we do not have ideation of the command. We cannot give the judgment whether the 3rd brigade was brought there for a reason, or was it smart, was it not smart move? So according to what we know today, do we think we know? Well, from what's flying in the information sphere about 3rd and some other detachments that were brought in, they were brought in to hold the corridor and to let other troops get out. But all those who were at the front, they know that idea, even if it was so, came to face several difficulties. Formal indicators for that was the fact that there were prisoners. There were some of our troops captured and some of them were executed. This was one of the bloodiest weeks in this regard. There were several executions, in fact, and that brings to mind the name of what our soldiers calling the Russian Federation troops. I don't like to call names, but it's difficult in this situation. This is a war crime. This is a crime against humanity, against the God's law and human laws. At least those who conducted those executions, that's related to them. And that story with that wounded fighter who called her sister and told her that they were abandoned. And you know what hit me there? The fact that he said, commander promised the evacuation, so we're waiting for evacuation. And those were several with him. They were seriously wounded. And also in the other news and channels, it did seep through that commander said, okay, leave everything, burn what you can, and withdraw. And that indicates at the situation that is called the loss of control in military practice. When the signal doesn't reach the recipient in the fashion it was designed, or it is not being executed, if it does. And this is one of our military deficiencies. Nobody knows the exact number of people who died, people who were lost. There are different rumors, some people comparing it with Debaltseve, because it matched also the date, almost to a date. Majority also withdrew, just like back then, but it was messy. So I think the idea was realized partially. Even if they had an idea to hold the corridor and to withdraw orderly, some, how would I put it delicately, first of all, the idea did not match the actual reality, because a lot of commanders from the front do not report the real situation often, and high-level ranking generals do not necessarily know all the details. And not all detachments were fulfilling their duties, their orders, and they started to mutually accuse each other. Those didn't hold, those withdrew, should have held. And even Yuri Butusov, the military correspondent, got attacked by commentary from 53rd Brigade. Supposedly he posted false information about them and lied about them. Well, I want to come to his defense here and say that if you're giving information intensely about the events on the front for 2 years, mistakes are inevitable. The fact that he was wrong 2 or 3 times during the whole war, this is just normal process. Don't scream at him, let him figure out where did the mistake come from, and let him come back and give more details. In general, the ideation was realized, so the troops withdrew from Avdiivka, right? But there's definitely room for improvement in this process. And the main fact is that at least we were 1 week late for that withdrawal. A week before, there was a dense fog in the area where our troops had a chance to withdraw. We could even, march in the open with music and all, and enemy would not even see us. Instead, we chose to wait till they started dropping 200 plus aerial bombs on us and till everything was turned into rubble. And then we had to skedaddle, and some of the remaining wounded soldiers were executed. If we just did that a bit earlier, everything would have been much better. Out of the main achievements is that the enemy failed to encircle our troops. Even not so, they actually succeeded in encircling some of them, but those groups broke through and managed to leave. So the diagnosis is simple. We overheld the position, and again, most likely due to the fact that information doesn't flow freely from top to bottom and other way. And this is the disease of Red Army. Ukrainian military is partly still the same tradition, and is sick with the same exact disease. And here's the result. All right, in your view, should there be lessons learned, detailed review of that situation to come to some conclusions that we were late, we did not realize the task properly? Did anybody fail to carry out their duties? Anybody needs to be responsible? Do we need to do anything here to prevent these mistakes in the future? We can go two ways here. We can go revolutionary way with the Institute of Commissars, who will be punishing severely those who failed to adhere to orders or to perform. Or we could do the same system that Americans installed after their failure in Vietnam. After action report and lessons learned process, where people are guaranteed from being responsible for the mistakes that they honestly describe and try to derive lessons learned from them. And commander always learns from the mistakes just like everybody else. So if you keep punishing them for making mistakes, you will dwindle the amount of those people who can even fulfill this function. And in the second option, you create conditions when commander can actually openly and freely discuss his mistakes. When he knows that he's not going to be punished, and his desire to even speak about that will be valued positively and will be supported. In America, it took them 5 to 7 years to install that system. For the first 2 years, military didn't even believe they can actually freely and openly talk about their mistakes, and they will not be reprimanded. But it did end up working. Creating such a system during war would be an overachievement. I know few people in Ukraine who were trying to install that, and some commanders in the same way are carrying out in their own detachments, but we'll see. And as for the Avdiivka, yeah, it would make sense to review the actions of certain commanders and commander-in-chief in relation to each other and to the situation, but who will be doing that? The system of military justice is destroyed. There is no military police that has real rights, there is no military judicial corps, and there are no special military courts where people who know what it is to command army in war times. So military attorneys, military lawyers could give these judgments. Civilian investigator, civilian judge cannot give the right estimate, cannot give the right sentencing and judgment. And I did talk to some of the generals who were being investigated. And they're telling me, it looks like this when a civilian is investigating them. Hello, Mr. General, please sit down. And then they ask him something like, well, here it says that this company did this and this battalion did this. What is the difference between a company and a battalion? So the justice like that cannot be competent. We need to create a hybrid system in this case, and I think it could look like this. What I would do, I would create a commission with a commander-in-chief or supreme commander-in-chief, where I would gather military officers, probably retired, the ones who are not caught in any scandal or corruption or anything, the ones who would be doing analysis from their professional point of view to the command, to the central command. And then they would be outlining not only mistakes, but separating mistakes from crimes. Those also happen. And as for the system of lessons learned, that needs to be installed in the troops. But there needs to be a desire to do that. There were people in the team of Zelensky and in the upper echelon of military who were trying to do that, but too few and not enough. And there is not a global desire now in the army to do that. But it does indeed preclude us from learning from our mistakes. We're losing the 6th town in the same scheme, in the same way, in the same fashion as we've lost 5 others. Avdiivka is number 6, lost on the Eastern Front in the same way, in the similar circumstances when the enemy encircles it, pushes through, and then we have to leave it in the emergent fashion. We should have derived some conclusions and learned lessons from it, but we are not, unfortunately. That means that we will be likely repeating that situation again. All right, you said about military crimes, war crimes. Well, I would say, if you really formulate it right, these are crimes against military service, because war crimes is the crimes against humanity at war. So we call it military crimes related to the service. So insubordination, refusal to fulfill orders. That principle apparently is in conflict with the principle of letting people speak the truth and relieve them of some responsibility for their mistakes. Where is the dividing border? The division would go in this fashion. If the person is talking about his mistake voluntarily, he should not be punished. So, or maybe, first time he's not punished. Second time, he goes under investigation and maybe the whole military court proceedings. But the way it should be organized is that for the first mistake at least, or maybe first 2 times, I would say, the investigation needs to come out with details of what happened with his help, and then he gets forgiven. This all can be done if you have a desire to do that, but there is no intent. And more than that, those people who could have made these decisions are stuck and drowning in operational routine on all levels of power. They have no time to evaluate what's happening and what can be done with it. And determination of a difference between a mistake, a punishable mistake, or a crime can only be done by the system of military justice, and I just said how it could have been done. Commission with the central command, this is strategic level, then on the lower operative command level, there could be a different level of that body, and then the same system in the troops and some corrections in the law with the Congress. If that effort is concertedly coordinated and done, then it could lead to us figuring out lessons learned. And we will be able then to help grow the commanders who are doing their job better and punish those who are doing it worse. Because if we don't have it, then one brigade starts to accuse the other that you've ran, you didn't hold, and then there are rumors, then there are accusations, and in practice we're losing the 6th town in the same fashion. It probably would be time to learn some lessons from it, but there are none. What do you want? We are a kindergarten state, not even children, not even elementary school. If somebody would ask me what is the symbol of Ukraine today, that would be a headless horse rider, I think. Rationality is not generally being valued high in society right now, but we also appear that we are absolutely irrational sometimes. The Western press, meantime, is posting a lot of articles about our survival, and the headlines, one worse than the other. And they're very reminiscent of what I was talking in September. And now it's more and more and more, and now the trickle turns into a flood with asks about what happens if Ukraine fails, what will we have to do, how do we fight after. These are the headlines of the main publications in the West. In the meantime, we in Ukraine continue to scream that we're going to lose our nation, language and culture under Putin's attack, war, and then repression. We had a chance to build our own country, and now he's coming to take it away from us. So it probably is time for us to learn some lessons, but even in these dire circumstances, we're kind of failing to do that. All right. Let me ask you another question about Avdiivka defense operation, as it is called. It is considered, or I've seen quite a few statements that publication by Forbes, initially that 3rd Storm Brigade, is being moved into Avdiivka, it also attracted attention of Russian Federation that it was some sort of secret information that hurt Ukraine defenders. Nikolai, this is like with Putin. On one hand, he is often written into the group of the highest demons who is going to destroy our country and the world at large. And on the other hand, he is usually referred to as the old senile grandpa. So we probably should figure something out in between, right? Same thing. And on one hand, we are considering that Russia is masterminds who started back in 2000s the whole treacherous plan of taking back Ukraine into their control area. Or on the other hand, we are thinking that they're so dumb that they're reading from Western newspapers the news about the front. Just like the saying goes, the victory has a lot of fathers and defeat is always an orphan. So Avdiivka is now in defeat somewhat, and we left one of the best fortified regions on the front since 2014. And Forbes said that Ukrainian army withdrew, defense forces withdrew, and the 3rd Brigade came in to help in the process. Without detail diving into what's happening there, it's difficult to estimate even the degree of influence of the newspaper publication at large on this. And I'm refusing to discuss that some Russians, actually Russian citizens, there's a difference between Russian and Russian citizens, as you might have heard from my other podcast, that they're learning about our troops movement from Western publications. Sorry, I'm not going to discuss that idiocy. Okay, this was important to get this answer. Thank you, Alexei. And let's look at the situation on the front at large. There are some statements about 5 directions of attacks that Russia is now initiating, inspired by the victory on the Avdiivka direction. Nikolai, I think you're quoting somebody with this question about inspiration. They're not inspired with the victory. They're inspired with the fact that for 2 months Americans are not transferring any aid to Ukraine. They know that we have catastrophic deficiency of certain calibers of artillery shells and some other military equipment. So they've just relied on that situation, aggregated some force, and now they're pushing. And today, people are saying, well, there are 50,000 in Zaporozhye. Is it the end of it? No, it is not. In 5 different parts of the front, they have about the same type of groups. First is near Orechova, Robotyno, here on the map. Second is Novomykhailovka. There it's a bit less than 50, but still quite a bit. Then Avdiivka itself, then Bakhmut, then Kupiansk, and a bit fewer, but also on the Svatov part of the front. So we can say 2 large groups and 2 smaller groups were on average between 40 and 50,000 troops, hundreds of tanks, hundreds of artillery systems and APCs, and that all together with the aerial bombs is being dropped on the heads of our soldiers. And if not for UAVs and the drones that we have, I don't know how we would be stopping them at the moment. All that stems from an American dream. When people cannot make decisions about the key questions of their own inner and foreign politics, and the infantry is paying with their blood for that. And the West, by the way, both Europe and United States, that talk a ton, they talk a lot and do very little. It continuously keeps creating heightened expectations with us. So our civilian part of society, our military, they hear almost daily some Western politician who comes out and says, we'll never leave Ukraine, we'll never abandon Ukraine, we will supply you something, there'll be 1 million of UAVs, there'll be more support, and then nothing happens. And I did remember send you from Ministry of Defense and Army in the United States, who made a statement that we provided some help to Ukrainian defense forces for $1 billion from our reserves, and we only have 5 or 6 billion left after that. But now we have to interrupt our other processes if Congress doesn't support us. And they gave the names of 2 main articles that are going to suffer: building of new barracks and popularizing the army service. And that's the message they're sending. Ukrainian infantry, you guys just go die under Russian shells, and they'll be capturing you in the trenches and executing you at the spot because you have nothing to defend yourself with, and they'll be broadcasting that. But please understand our difficult situation. It's so easy for you to warm up in the burning tank, and we're freezing in our new barracks. Yeah, you're basically saving your butts in the front while we're spilling our blood back here. I thought I know people, right? I specialize in studying psychology, collective subconsciousness, and all that. I'm also professional military. I spent many years in military analytics, military political analytics. But this war is a tremendous lesson. Even I, for myself, did not expect such a degree of treachery and cynicism that rules everywhere, both here and in the West. And here, I mean, with Russians, on the Russian Federation side, because this war bared such depths of darkness, because if you go over all the statements that were made in the West, you can probably execute them summarily for creating heightened expectations and false propaganda with Ukrainian society. Because we are kindergartners. We are there in the kindergarten and we believe all their words that they say. And we believe in some values that the West doesn't even have anymore. They basically threw us under the steamroller, keeps us under that steamroller with these statements and promises that tomorrow there'll be some magic weapons coming. And we have a dire situation on the front. They're not sending us anything. And then 2 months later, when Avdiivka is lost, when 5 major Russian groups are trying to breach our defense line, Army of the United States coming out and saying, what, you seriously want us to withdraw money from popularizing the army service and from building new barracks? Are you in your right mind? Do you understand to what degree you're putting the world history in peril? And then American politicians come out and say, we are with you till the end, we'll never abandon you, NATO, EU will be supporting. And then about a week later, the same politicians come out and usually say other things. Let's take a look at the dictionary. Hang on. Well, first of all, let's define what is till the end, then what is with you, what is the end, how it is understood in this situation. And that's where we are. We have what we have. Political dictionary, newspeak, right. Listen, so the question about the direction of attacks of Russian Federation, where do you see the major danger? And does it make sense to withdraw troops to prepared lines? Or if, yeah, right, that's the question. Do we have those prepared defense lines? There are different estimations, Alexei. Well, this week, I think, was crowned with an interesting statement. One of the pro-president's channel said that it was a wise decision to withdraw from Avdiivka, and now it's time to build fortifications. Well, I'll tell you that the wise decision, if when you build fortifications first and then you withdraw from Avdiivka or wherever into those fortified areas. The situation is complex. In some parts there are fortified systems, in the others there are none. We should have considered withdrawing to the natural borders, natural defense lines like rivers, canals, ravines, but it's not happening. And the problem is not that our strategy of war is not quite adequate. It's also not quite adequately managed, and we can see it by Bakhmut, by Avdiivka, where we stayed for at least a week longer. And we created first that sack where our troops were about to be encircled, and then we had to throw some of our best to the corridor to hold the path out. Almost lost them as well in the process. Managed to leave, losing wounded and more people in the process, only because we did not make a decision a week sooner. But new commander-in-chief, when Avdiivka was being lost, he actually made an interesting decision to participate in Shalimov conference of surgeons. Right, without him, surgeons would not be able to carry the conference on. So that news was actually published on the main page of the Central Command. So these are the news from the absurd theater. And the news are pretty bad overall. The West is also discussing that if the Western aid is not about to come to Ukraine in the next couple months, the front will start collapsing in a few parts within a couple months. Sooner than that, we'll start running out of air defense shells. And imagine the consequences of 50 Russian missiles hitting their targets because we had nothing to shoot them down with. This is what we are faced with due to the West and the fantastic level of their support, partly due to debates in the United States that are quarreling about whether to protect the southern border or not. And yet we find out that the army can still provide aid to us when they want to. President has the drawdown authority that he could supply us directly, but no, they're not going to do that without Congress. And there was an interesting article in Politico, American publication. Right, the usual. We learn news about Ukraine from foreign press. This is our reality today. The results of Munich Security Conference, were formulated as to not let Ukrainian army fall apart. And then President of Czech Republic, and that's, by the way, to not fall apart, that's the current agenda. And then Peter Pavel, President of Czech Republic, came out and said that they found 1 million shells and of 150 caliber and 300,000 of 122 millimeter shells. We just need money to buy that to send it to Ukraine. So I have a big question still, where is it? They don't understand what they're doing. They dump these news into the media sphere, and the news like that, they bring Ukraine high up on the emotional swing, right? People start discussing that. Imagine if we get 1 million shells, the situation on the front drastically would change. We cannot, of course, dispel Russian military completely, but it will absolutely have to be rebalanced in different parts of the front and will be prevailing in many of them. And then after that news, that is gone, it's disappeared. So that seems like just injecting these news is treacherous. But I am learning to believe that, to understand that the West can fall for different degrees of treachery with news and all that towards us. One more thing, a European commissar came out today and said that, we can also send Ukrainian men from Europe, those who left the country, we can send them back to Ukraine because mobilization is not criminal prosecution, so we should probably send them back. So I have a question. The West, who promised to give us shells and then failed to do so, is now figuring out ways to send Ukrainian men back to Ukraine so they would die instead of those shells being provided. Is that a way they pay us back for their inability to help us? So logically they declare, we will help you, we're proud of you, we will be with you. Second, in reality, don't give anything. Third, all right, let's gather Ukrainians whom we can find here and send them back, right? Probably exchange them one for one. 1 million men for 1 million shells that we were not given. That's the current West for you. Me, as somebody sitting here in the West, that's what we're dealing with. People in Ukraine, you don't understand something. What you call our Ukrainian squabble, you just don't read British, French, German, and American newspapers. You should be reading some of it. What in Ukraine we're saying, don't say that, this is Kremlin narrative, otherwise you'll be considered a Kremlin spy. Just read the Western press. That's where you would see Kremlin narratives. You won't even imagine what they're writing here. Me and Nikolai are voicing some of these things here on this stream. But you need to understand that we are facing soon catastrophe. Now it's in the open, it's being discussed. I'm not inventing anything here. They're discussing that Ukraine has 3 months left. Who said that? Borrell, the head of European diplomacy, that in 3 months we are running a risk of everything collapsing. And then next publication comes out and says that if Ukraine is captured, we'll have 20 million refugees in Europe. We need to find ways to do something about it. I'll also see if the West will try to return these refugees under Putin's command if Ukraine falls one day. Because, if you remember the Second World War, Americans and Brits were giving up the Cossacks, those volunteers who were fighting against Stalin's army, back to Stalin by battalions. So, on one hand, I want to say, we can only rely on ourselves, nobody will redeem us, neither God nor Tsar nor hero. Well, maybe God can. But on the other hand, I do want to ask, what the heck were we doing for the last 32 years, especially for the last 10, with military industry, with economy and everything? A series of rhetoric questions. The resume is simple. If we do not get aid in the next 2 months, we'll first lose air defense capabilities and then the front will collapse. There are some news coming out that we will be getting some missiles here and there, but given that overall support dwindled 3 times, again, according to the available stats and the publications in the West, that means that we'll not have enough weapons to fight with the Russian Federation, and we'll be paying with our lives of civilians under their missiles, and with our lives of infantry on the front. In the meantime, the West will be discussing, is Putin indeed so evil? Perhaps we can find some mechanisms how we can work with him. Yeah, in regards to that number, that Western aid dwindled 3 times, there is actually a report from Kiel Institute of World Economy that says that Europe will have to go a long way to fully be able to replace aid that was coming from the United States. And according to today's data, the aid coming from Europe is bigger than the current aid coming from the United States, but that same research is publishing that in order to fully replace American capability of supporting Ukraine, Europe will have to double their military production, and that's given that Europe already ramped up and jumped above their heads in that already. Nikolai, they jumped in the financial department pretty high, but not in military because they just don't have capabilities like Americans do. And there was another article today that if the United States will leave NATO, Europe will not be able to hold Russia. Europe will just lose to Russia. And they named several reasons. First, they failed to launch military-industrial complex. They are failing on the schedule. And second, they squabbled too much with each other. This is about solidarity. They're not quite supportive of us altogether. You see what Poles are doing at the border. And EU, with all their different countries and all their different opinions, with Fico and Orban. And I want to remind that there'll be elections into European Parliament, where there is a risk that the European right may get there. And their rhetoric is very heavily based on the desire to rebalance it with Russia. And now there are voices that Ukraine should not be relying too much on the NATO summit in Washington in summer. There won't be much support coming from there. Oh, yes, and we'll also move by another 6 months the delivery of jets to Ukrainian front. You know what our liberals and Russian resisting Putin liberals fail to understand? I don't know when I listen to them whether to cry or laugh. They're saying about this, it's very difficult for them to understand that the United States cannot do something. They're always trying to find explanation why they're behaving like this. Perhaps they do not like us too much. Maybe we need to be more likable. Perhaps we failed to explain all the depths of our depths. And if we did, they would probably pour the shower of gold on us and remove Putin, and would help Ukraine and change Russia. They just fail to understand that Americans cannot do a lot of things. When I'm reading these analysts and bloggers, I'm basically crying in the pillow in the hotel and always asked to replace it because this one is wet. And the publications the usual publications are, why United States have not dissected Russia yet, right? Because if they wanted to, they could have dissected it in about 48 hours. Perhaps we failed to explain how evil Putin regime is. Or why don't they just win over Russia in the direct conflict? Because it's strange, right? They could have launched thousands of Tomahawks and jets. F-35s would have flown and destroyed everything, the all Russian military. Why Putin was not assassinated, all right? Very often in commentary I get that. Alexei, do you know why Putin is still alive? Why they have not killed him yet? Or why have not they started the Third World War to win? And while nobody in America is listening to us, I'll say that United States are not capable of doing a lot of things. Perhaps they even want to, but they can't. I would remind our viewers that states recently fled from Afghanistan. They abandoned rather shamefully 300,000 men that were helping them while they were working there, and they only evacuated probably about 100,000 from them, so 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4. They abandoned families. People were holding onto the plane tires, throwing their kids over the fence, giving them to soldiers so they could take them to the United States. Right? How does your liberal thinking explain that to you? They failed to destroy Taliban, didn't want to, were not explained well by those people who put their lives and their careers and their families at stake, having helped Americans for 20 years to rebuild Afghanistan, and then they're leaving and promised to evacuate them, promised to take them with them, but didn't. What they failed to understand, right? Americans just can't. Sometimes they cannot do things. They cannot kill Putin, they cannot dissect Russia, they are not sure they can win in direct conflict with Russia, and they're concerned with that probability, and they're not eager to face it. So we should have thought about that sooner. When you think that they want to give us a ton of aerial defense missiles and a billion of ATACMS, perhaps they can't, right? That thought is probably more scary than they don't want to. But this thought never occurs to them. Our grant recipients here in Ukraine, same as those in Russia before Putin really squelched everything out, they're now thinking and tormenting themselves why America is not understanding, why West at large is not understanding. Perhaps we need to start praying to some liberal gods or something. And they give the features of Lord Almighty to the United States, the Lord that doesn't quite like humans. Guys, they understand everything pretty well. Imagine they can't. This thought is more difficult and more scary, I know. But imagine they can't. Neither dissect, nor win, nor destroy. And what then? What are you doing now? I have a small suggestion here. Rational in regards to our stream. I think we here can still support military of Ukraine here and now, right? So besides what streams we are doing, we're also supporting servicemen of Ukraine, and right under this stream there is a link to a personal fundraiser of the 15th Mobile Bodyguards Detachment that covers some parts of the front, and they're gathering money for a good UAV that allows them to fulfill the tasks. Yeah, one of those million UAVs that the West promised to deliver but still haven't. But if you have 100 hryvnias to donate to help them, that would be fantastic, so they can carry out their duties. And we support that. We never touch the money. This is a direct into their bank account. This is the most honest way. Right. Soldiers are the only holy thing we have now, and however we put pins and needles in the West and shame our political leadership, we still have to gather funds for our Ukrainian defense forces, because they're the only thing that stands between the world where we are and where we are not. So please, let's make an effort and gather some money for that UAV. By the way, last week we closed 5 big fundraisers. Thank you. You guys were helping us very effectively. I think people start to understand that it's only up to us to help our own troops fight this war. All right, I do want to ask this question now, because it exists, it's alive, and it touches the fundraising, the Telegram channels that are getting excited. Igor Lachenkov, there is a fella who published a picture of you, for whatever reason, with a black ribbon. I understand that is related to your self-identification in Yulia Latynina's stream, where you said that you are Rus, that you are Russian. And I watched the stream. People told me to specifically go watch it. I do not watch everything, but I found time to do that. And I personally think that I don't think anybody ever created such a content that completely devours today's Russian ideology, dilutes it and dissects it and shows how puny and inconsequential it is. Those people who have not seen that, they probably should. At first I was giggling, actually, but at the end I saw what you were doing with it. And I think this is one of the most outstanding streams. I do not like singing asanas to anybody, but those who haven't seen it, I would strongly suggest to go think a little and watch it. A well-known political propagandist in Putin's Russia in 2014, Sergei Kurganyan, called Alexei Arestovich the most dangerous mind in Ukraine. And I'm afraid I'm the only one right now that is actually building and destroying the idea that is capable to destroy whole Putin's ideology. And let's call it Rus Ukraine. And basically it's the message that Russia is the stolen brand, that Feofan Prokopovich, a Ukrainian, helped to baptize Russia, and Russia is Rus in Greek spelling. And if you look at the core of it, at the source of it, then they lose all the claims to everything. That's exactly what should be countered to Putin's 2-hour speech about going back to the origins. Who haven't watched that stream, I would suggest, yes, go watch it. I seriously suggest that you need to understand the difference between Rus and Russian citizens. And Zelensky says that actually we have now a Rus-Russian war. And we should return this brand back to Ukraine, because in Ukrainian it sounds Rus from that meaning. And that's when I said I'm Russian with Rus. I'm Rus-Russian, I'm not a Russian citizen. This is the Rus that Franco was writing about. This is the term that is used for thousands of years in canonical Orthodox documents. There is a government holiday in Ukraine, the day of baptism of Rus Ukraine, that is being celebrated annually. And I guess I'm unlucky. I'm living in a country of idiots. You're trying to give them for, 20 years already, for us as a civilization in Ukraine, the weapon that will completely defeat and decimate Russian ideology in the Russian Federation. And I keep being written off into Russian spies. I always remember the Sherlock Holmes part, the British one, series, when Mycroft Holmes is talking to his younger brother Sherlock and is saying, imagine how difficult it is for me to live, where Sherlock is complaining that he has to live among the usual folks. Imagine how difficult it is for me to live, when I even sometimes think that you're dumb, Sherlock. I live in an aquarium. And I think very often I find myself living in the aquarium too, Nikolai, among the guppies. And people fail to understand the difference between the ideology and the message I'm sending and what Moscow is propagating. Because I'm afraid they will remember my words when Muscovites will be kicking the stools from under their feet and hanging them on the main streets of Kiev. Meantime, I'm offering them not only a way to save themselves, but also to win over that Putin's invention that he was talking about for 2 hours. An ideal solution that fully fits historic narratives, that draws a direct line of inheritance and dynastic and cultural in our favor, which is true, which is relying on the actual facts, not like myths they're using in Russia, and is fully destroying Russian narrative, the main meta-narrative, the pretense for Putin to attack our lands and the other lands neighboring Russian Federation. What else? Moreover, if you've seen this stream, I'm hitting very precisely at the point that they're not an empire. They don't behave as an empire, and they're not Rus, they're not Russians. Because empires don't behave like this, and Russian civilization does not behave like that. These are not the values. These are not the right world that the civilization was standing for. And we called it a school of empire, a school for emperors with Yulia Latynina. And the other name for that stream was Who Are Russians? And I was outlining that whatever is happening in Russia now, they're not worth of the soles of the feet of the Rus civilization in the political sphere. And what? Right, that Russian Federation citizens are not worthy of the foot soles of Rus. Right, that's the message. And at best, our Telegram channels are doing what now? Giggling and saying Arestovich said that he is Russian? Well, what can I say? I'm an unlucky man. It's very difficult here in Ukraine with rationality, with logos. We've been running away from it as a society for years, and sometimes it caught with us, but in the 20s we're running too fast. It fails to. And I'll add here more, Alexei, that the concept of Rus Ukraine, the concept of Rus, is fully matching with ideology of Ukraine nationalists, by the way. What is at the core of the Ukrainian nationalist studies, right? What the right sector is supposedly looking at. Nikolai, indeed, I do understand the material I was referring to. I was studying it for years. I actually have no squabbles with the ideologists on the right. Not even a pretense or anything. There is a deep love and understanding, because they do understand what I'm saying, and I understand what they're saying. Because if you look at the symbols, the sacred figure of Azov is who? Sviatoslav the Brave, whom Arestovich is suggesting to put as the main conceptual figure of the project Rus Ukraine. Sviatoslav the Brave. We imagine symbols, we imagine logic. The pretense and the judgment and the tax is coming from idiots who heard about Rus from Timothy Snyder and from left Canadian professors. And some of our own professors who are getting the Western grants here. This is a story, let's talk about that. I was thinking whether to bring it or not, but in '91, when everything fell apart and all our humanitarians were not capable to sustain themselves, they basically had a salary of $9 per month and they had kids and wives, and here you get Western grants for hundreds of dollars a month, which was fantastic at that time. But for that, you needed to push certain narratives and certain programs in life to get those grants. And those people who 3 months before that were defending their PhDs on dialectic materialism, on the history of Communist Party, they started to study not just Ukrainian language, but they also started picking out the right Ukrainian accent to pronounce things in, and the right words that they wanted to use. So they were so enthusiastic about bringing these narratives from the grant organizations, but also they started changing Western Ukrainian dialect towards the Western dialect of 20s or 40s in Ukraine. Those who lived in Kiev, for generations, they were changing colors and changing shoes in the flight. And that's where these narratives entered our society. They were getting $50 and they were rewriting story, history, humanitarians and all that. And today's society that learned all the trash that was given to us as a history of Ukraine, the left side of our society, who think that our history starts from the times of Ukraine national resistance around the Second World War, they faint when Arestovich says that he is Rus. I would suggest they probably read Bogdan Khmelnytsky. How did he sign himself? Getman, Ruski. Or you can read more historic sources where we go back to the Grand Lithuanian Duchy, where there were Lithuanians, Poles, and Rus as a part. What is the central street in Lvov, the westernmost city? It's Ruski. How did another ruler of Ukraine from the 1800s was calling himself Duke of Rus, right? What Franco was saying, not me who is saying that we are Rus. All those people whom you carry on your banners were claiming that we are Rus. And you're attacking me for my position when I'm repeating the words of your historic leaders. Khmelnytsky was calling himself the Duke of Rus. And we were never called otherwise. We were always called Rus, and only very recently we were starting to be called Ukrainians. That's the middle of the 19th century, when national project with humanitarian core after revolutions in Europe started to be rebuilt in Ukraine on our territory. And they picked up the works of Grushevsky, his lectures in Lvov, when he moved from Kiev to Lvov, when he invented a new way to teach Ukrainian history. Read Alexei Tolochko the Jr. He is a specialist in the history of Kiev and Rus, and he is showing how modern narratives about Ukraine were being built, how these things were installed over time. We were always Rus. We were always Ruski. And since we cannot lose Ukraine as well, by the way, that's why I'm keeping both, Rus-Ukraine. We were baptized as Rus Ukraine, and that's what I'm calling us. And then some Mr. A, in the words of your leaders and your sacred figures, is saying that he follows them, that he is alike, he's continuing their line, and now they're screaming in their telegrams that a Moscow spy finally came out and acknowledged that he is a Russian pig. Well, why are you not screaming that to Ivan Franko? Read about what he's writing about Rus Ukraine. Why are you not putting that in the face of Bogdan Khmelnytsky, Ivan Bykovsky, who, as you're proud and often repeat, who destroyed Moscow troops near Konotop? Why don't you put that in regards to Konstantin Ostrożski, who was Duke of Rus, or Danilo Galitsky, who was baptized as the king of what? A king of Rus, etc., etc. They can, Arestovich of course can't. And now we can go back from historic discourse and go back into the views of modern humanitarian rights, what our leadership is bringing up on the banners now, and to be continued in part 2.